Welcome to this unit on political philosophy or on justice. Justice itself has a lot of different flavors. There are a lot of different aspects of justice that a person could take a look at. And in this particular course, we're going to be taking a look at two of the flavors that justice comes in. One of those is what we could call political justice. Another of those is called distributive justice. Another very common kind of justice is what you might call, say, criminal justice. Criminal justice is all about what a society is supposed to do with people who break its rules, with what sort of rules there are supposed to be to begin with what kinds of procedures you go about deciding who's broken the rules, and of course that in terms of punishments and how to all that sort of stuff. That's all rolls into criminal justice. That's one thing that people often think when they hear about justice. Another flavor, and the thing that we're going to be starting with here, is this sense of justice in terms of what should a government be like to begin with, right? And this is what we call political justice. Political justice has a major question as what kind of a government is supposed to be a good one, okay? And what is it supposed to do, right? What's the proper role of government? So that's going to be an issue we're going to take a look at. And we're going to take a look at some of the biggest ideas in political justice in the first half of this unit before going to take a look at distributive justice, which is another whole thing. Distributive justice, we'll say more about it when we get there, but basically distributive justice is the kind of justice that so every society has to make decisions about how much of everything everybody gets and how to decide who gets how much of what, right? And so all of those kinds of questions are concerning distributive, sometimes people call it economic justice. And so we're going to be taking a look at that somewhat later in the course. But for now, we're going to be taking a look at political justice, this question of governmental legitimacy. What is it that gives a government a right to exist in the first place? What is a good government supposed to be like? And what is government supposed to do, right? These are all very important questions. And for some answers to this question, we're going to go all the way back to the very, very beginnings of political thought in Western philosophy. This dialogue with Thrasymachus is a piece of the Republic, right? This is again the very, very famous, very influential book that Plato wrote, way back when. The Republic itself goes in phases, right? So there's an early part of the Republic where a lot of people are sort of sitting around discussing, what they think justice even is or what justice means, and this is from that part of the Republic. Another part of the Republic is where Socrates and some others start to, sketch out Plato's idea of what a perfectly just society would really look like and how it would work. And there are some very, very influential ideas in that part of it. Every idea in the Republic has been tried any number of times. Some of them work very, very well and are an enduring part of the way that modern government works. Other ideas in the Republic are completely wackadoodle, and yet have been tried any number of times, such as the pedigree of the Republic. So this piece of the Republic, again, is from that early part where, they've got a number of people sort of discussing what they think justice even is. And Thrasymachus is one of those who presents a particular view. Now, the Greeks had the best names, people like Polemarchus and Glaucon and Thrasymachus. And like, if you're really hunting for baby names and want to be sure, to give somebody something that's actually a name, but that nobody really has, go for ancient Greeks, mind the Republic, Thrasymachus, right? Boy or girl, who cares? Nobody knows the difference anymore. And so, yeah, who would know? It's like, oh, Thrasymachus, that's a Greek man's name. Whatever, it could be a Greek anybody's name. So in any case, Thrasymachus was actually the name of an actual person, probably more than one actual person, but certainly there was an actual person that we know about existing at around the time that Plato lived, and his name was Thrasymachus. And what's unclear is whether the character in this dialogue has anything to do with that particular Thrasymachus. It may or may not. We just don't know. The name itself means something like ferocious fighter. And so that probably means something here. And I want to say a little bit about the way that Plato did some things in the Republic before we get into what Thrasymachus's position was and Plato's response. So back in the day, right, when Plato's writing the Republic, written language isn't that old, right? I mean, it's not been going on for that long, certainly in Greek. And so there's, a lot of, it's the early days of writing. Writing itself had to be put onto materials that were expensive, right? And the process of writing out a whole book is very labor intensive. You have to make sure you get everything right. The whole thing. I mean, scrolls, essentially, books were valuable, and they didn't grow on trees in the sense in which they were readily available. And so the thing is, if you wanted to read a book back in the ancient world, it's not like unless you were a very, very rich person, you probably did not own any books of your own. Right. And so if you wanted to get any benefit out of reading a book, you'd have to go to whoever had that book, sometimes a kind of a library, perhaps. There were some of those in the ancient world, not really resembling libraries as they exist today, but, same basic idea. Or you would, know somebody who owned one of these books. And so the idea is, if you were going to get the benefit out of it, you'd have to pretty much read it once and then remember it. Right. That's sort of a thing. And so oftentimes writers, good writers, and Plato was an excellent writer, would salt the book through with ways of remembering what the book said. Okay, and so the behavior of some of the characters in the Republic is a clue as to, it helps you remember. That's what a mnemonic is a thing that helps you remember. It helps you remember what their positions were. Right, and so right off the bat, when we see, very early in this dialogue, when we see Thrasymachus essentially get onto the stage, as it were, his behavior is going to give you a clue. It's going to help you remember what his ideas were, and the fact that his name means fierce fighter in Greek, right, is another clue as to just what kind of a guy Thrasymachus is in the Republic. So when he comes in, Plato writes, he, gathering himself up, he came at us like a wild beast seeking to devour us. We were quite panic-stricken at the sight of him. He roared out to the whole company, "What folly, Socrates, has taken possession of you all?" Right? And some bit later, he says, "What if I give you an answer about justice that is other and better than any of these?" That means the ones that they've been talking about so far. He says, "What do you deserve to have done to you?" Well, my goodness, what kind of a guy is this, right? Seems very aggressive, very overbearing. He tries to sort of steamroll his opponents, shout them into submission, right? If this is his kind of personality, what do you suppose he thinks justice is? Right? You think, well, maybe it has something to do with sort of might and aggression. And if that's what you're thinking so far, you've gotten Plato's point, and you're correct. That's absolutely the idea that Plato means to further by having him act so aggressively. So we can take a look at the way the dialogue goes from here, right? Socrates, after Thrasymachus says, "Okay, so if I give you an answer about justice that's better than any that you've heard so far, what do you deserve to have done to you?" Right? And Socrates, "Done to me? What are you talking about?" And he plays it cool. He says, "Well, as becomes the ignorant, I must learn from the wise. I guess that's what I deserve to have done to me." And Thrasymachus responds, "What? No payment? A pleasant notion." Right? So now he's demanding payment and thinks that, like, they're the idiots, right? He's like, "So no, you're the idiots for not, like, proposing. Oh no, of course we should pay you money for giving us, such a thing." I mean, just imagine being in just a standard, like a public discussion. You're out in a park or something, talking to a bunch of friends, and people are kind of wandering by, chiming in on the conversation. They're interested, and somebody's like, "Hey, how about if I can, say, really contribute something to this conversation? Of course you should pay me for that," right? I mean, just imagine. It's crazy. And so Socrates repeats what is kind of a running joke throughout all of Plato's dialogues, including the Republic, where Socrates always at least claims to be broke, right? He's, "Oh, well, I'll pay when I have the money." And of course, Glaucon, who's, again, an actual person, Plato's brother, he says, "Oh, well, you have the money, Socrates, and you, Thrasymachus, need be under no anxiety about money. We'll all make a contribution for Socrates," right? People pay Socrates' way in all kinds of things all throughout, again, Plato's dialogues and through the Republic. So there's a bit of a running joke in here. Now, here's the thing. Most people don't expect to look at ancient literature thinking that there will be jokes in there. but I assure you jokes had been invented well before Plato wrote the Republic. And Socrates is actually quite a funny guy, right? He jokes around a lot. He's very sarcastic, especially when he thinks he's the intellectual better of one of the people he's talking to, and that happens quite often. Socrates was extremely bright. I mean, he's one of history's great geniuses. And so, yeah, he jokes around all the time. He makes fun of people in very subtle ways. He uses sarcasm. And so be looking around for that. Be looking, try to put something like a real conversational tone into this, and you'll find that the Republic is really quite enjoyable to read. So let's get to Thrasymachus's theory of justice. So finally, after everybody cajoles him for a while, and says, oh, no, really, come on, please tell us. We'd love to know what you think of justice. He says, okay, he says this. I proclaim that justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. And I'll just imagine like crickets or something like that, because everyone's, I imagine, perhaps not impressed with this answer. Now, why do you not praise me, he says, but of course you don't, right? He's just indignant that they don't recognize the brilliance that's in front of them. Right. And so because of this tone, like, again, when somebody's like really, really confident and just belting it out and yelling at you and thinking that they're smarter than you are, one of the things that you try and do is you try and like put them in their place, right? And that's exactly what Socrates tries to do. So his first reply to Thrasymachus's first to this idea of justice that Thrasymachus gives them is he pretends to misunderstand him on purpose to try and get his goat, and it works. Okay, and so this is what he says. So Socrates says, "Justice, as you say." Now you might imagine him doing a sort of faux, thoughtful voice, right? Justice, as you say, is the interest of the stronger. What, Thrasymachus, do you mean by that? You cannot mean to say that because Mike Tyson, the boxer, is stronger than we are, and finds the eating of beef conducive to his bodily strength, that to eat beef is therefore equally for our good, who are weaker than he is, and right and just for us, right? So again, he says, so do you mean that justice is eating beef? Is that what you're trying to say? Now, of course, you'll have to realize I've done a little bit of light editing of the text. Socrates himself said nothing at all about Mike Tyson, but he used the name of some Greek wrestler that the people in the audience would have known about, but today nobody has any idea, right? And so I went ahead and paraphrased a little bit to give you an idea. So he's like, okay, look, Mike Tyson's stronger than all of us, and so let's say that he finds eating beef to keep up his strength, right? So does that mean justice is eating beef? Is that what you mean? Of course, that's not what Thrasymachus means. But again, Socrates is messing with him. Okay, he's trying to get his goat here, and so Thrasymachus replies, "That's abominable of you, Socrates. You take the words in the sense which is most damaging to the argument." Okay. This is where I'm going to take issue with our translator here, who was a guy named Benjamin Jowett. And part of the reason I use the Jowett translation, actually, most of the reason I use the Jowett translation is because it's public domain. It's free, but it's an old translation. And so some of the English that's used is very formal academic English, and in ways where I think more conversational English might have gotten the point across. I think what Thrasymachus is saying here is he's saying, look, Socrates, you're misunderstanding me on purpose to make me look silly. Okay, that's what he's really saying. And he's completely right. That's exactly what Socrates is doing. He's pretending to misunderstand the argument to get his goat, and he gets it. Okay. And so Socrates, again, imagine in a sarcastic tone, "Not at all, my good sir. I am just trying to understand your words, and I wish you would be a little clearer." Okay, I mean, just, lay it on thick. All right. So Thrasymachus then clarifies his view, explains it a little bit. So his clarification goes this way. He says, these forms of government, right, all these governments that there are, they make laws with a view to their own interests. And these laws, which are made by them for their own interests, are the justice that they deliver to their subjects. And they punish anyone who transgresses them as a breaker of the law and an unjust person. That is what I mean when I say that in all states there is the same principle of justice, which is the interest of the government. And as the government must be supposed to have power, the only reasonable conclusion is that there is one principle of justice everywhere, which is that justice is whatever is in the interests of the stronger. Right? So, I mean, so what he's saying is look around. Okay? It's like the people who are in power are making rules based on what they want the rules to be. You look everywhere, that's what you see. That's what justice just is. You might complain about what people should do or what everyone might do in some kind of an ideal world, but he's like, no, no, this is what justice is, right? It's just the interest of the stronger. It's a very cynical view by modern lights. So Thrasymachus, again, he describes his view in this way, and now finally gives Socrates a kind of target, right, that he can really aim at. But despite having a really good target, Socrates' first response here, right, his first sort of line of attack here, honestly, it doesn't really go anywhere. He points out a kind of pseudo problem for Thrasymachus. Thrasymachus can make an emendation to the way he answers a couple of these questions that sort of gets him out of trouble. But we'll see how this goes, because it is a big part of the text here. And so Socrates starts off by saying, okay, first tell me, do you admit that it is just for subjects to obey their rulers, right? Now, if you ever find yourself in dialogue with Socrates or something like him, and he starts asking you like really simple sounding questions, right? Questions that you think that are the answers to are pretty obvious. And then he starts asking them like in several different ways just to make sure, like, get you on record for saying, yes, I agree. That's my view. Just know that the other shoe's about to drop. Just know that he's got you on something. Okay, that's the way this works. And so, Thrasymachus admits, he's like, yeah, I do, of course, that's just what I said, right? And so he says, are the rulers of states absolutely infallible, or are they sometimes liable to make mistakes? And here Thrasymachus makes a slight error. He says, well, to be sure, they are liable to make mistakes. Now, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable thing to say, but he actually should have answered this question a little bit differently, and we'll come back to that here in a minute. But before we go back to it, Socrates is going to then, sort of close the jaws of his little trap here. He says, okay, so then the laws that they make must be obeyed by their subjects. That's what you call justice? Again, notice he's restated a question from earlier. Thrasymachus, yeah, doubtless. That's just what I said. And so Socrates says, well, let's consider then. Haven't we admitted that the rulers may be mistaken about their own interest in what they command? And also that justice is to obey the rulers? Hasn't that been admitted? Right? Again, both of those questions have already been asked and answered, and so Thrasymachus says yes. Maybe even impatiently, yes. Right? And then so Socrates drops the other shoe here. He says, well, then you must also have acknowledged justice not to be for the interest of the stronger, when the rulers unintentionally command things to be done which are to their own injury. For if, as you say, justice is also the obedience which the subject renders to their commands, in that case, O wisest of men, right, there's some sarcasm on Socrates' part here, is there any escape from the conclusion that the weaker are commanded to do not what is for the interest, but what is for the injury of the stronger? And so what he points out is a kind of contradiction in the way that Thrasymachus has explained his view, right? So if Thrasymachus says that justice is whatever the interest is whatever the interest of the strong are, and that justice is the subject obeying their ruler, okay? And if he admits that rulers can sort of make mistakes, right, and can command what is not in their interest but to their injury, then of course, if the subject has to obey them, if that's what justice also is, then justice both is and isn't in the interest of the stronger. Right? And so it's a neat and tidy little contradiction. But again, this is a problem with how Thrasymachus has explained his view. It's not really a problem inherent in Thrasymachus's view. Now, this is the wonderful thing about a dialogue, and why dialogue format really suits philosophy very well, is because it gets to show people in the process of thinking. And so Thrasymachus, you might imagine, thinks about this, and Thrasymachus is no dummy here. He figures out, it's like, okay, I see what the problem is. The problem is how I've answered one of these earlier questions. I really should have said something else, but didn't really think it was problematic until you pointed this thing out here, right? And so what he does here is he adjusts his view. He explains why he should have answered one of these questions a little differently earlier in the dialogue. And so he says, oh, you're using verbal trickery on me, Socrates, which is true. He was. Do you mean, for example, that he who is mistaken about the sick is a physician in that he is mistaken? Or that he who makes a mistake in arithmetic or grammar is an arithmetician or grammarian at the time when he is making a mistake in respect of the mistake? True, we say that the physician or the arithmetician or the grammarian has made a mistake, but this is only a figure of speech, For the fact is that neither the grammarian nor any other person of skill ever makes a mistake in so far as he is what his title implies. None of them makes a mistake unless their skills fail them, and then they cease to be skilled artist. No artist or sage or ruler makes mistakes at the time when he is what his name implies, though he is commonly said to make mistakes, and I adopted the common mode of speaking. But to be perfectly accurate, since you are such a lover of accuracy, right, we should say that the ruler, insofar as he is a ruler, is infallible, and being infallible always commands that for which is for his own interest, and the subject is required to execute his commands, and therefore, as I said at first and now repeat, justice is the interest of the stronger. All right, so this is a sort of a long drawn out thing here, but he's saying, look, he says, look, when you asked me earlier whether rulers make mistakes, I should have said, well, in one sense yes, and in one sense no. In the sense in which rulers do make mistakes, you're talking about real, actual people who are rulers. Yes, people sometimes make mistakes, and people are sometimes rulers, okay? But when you're asking me in the abstract, does a ruler make mistakes? Well, no, okay? So think of it this way. Imagine your math teacher is showing you how to do a particular math problem, right? And they say, this is how to do that particular math problem. And you raise your hand and you say, yes, but what if I make a mistake? And they'll say, well, then you're doing it wrong, okay? And so when you're describing something in the abstract, you're not considering mistakes, okay? So again, imagine you're in medical school and somebody says, here are the symptoms you look to diagnose this particular disease. And somebody raises their hand and says, yes, but what if I make a mistake? They're like, well, then you will have done it wrong then. But look, in the abstract, the way we're talking about how to do it in the ideal, in the abstract. Right? So when you're talking in the abstract, like the abstract mathematician doesn't make a mistake, or the abstract doctor does what a doctor is supposed to do. The abstract ruler does what a ruler is supposed to do. Right? The abstract auto mechanic fixes a problem the way that they're supposed to. Okay? Even though actual people who are auto mechanics do sometimes make mistakes. Right, so that's really what Thrasymachus is saying here. He's like, yes, actual people do make mistakes, but we're talking in the abstract, right? The ruler in the abstract rules in favor of what their own interests are. Okay, so that does actually get Thrasymachus out of trouble. And so this then begins Socrates' third response. Remember, the first one was just to sort of make fun of him by pretending to misunderstand him. The second response, points out this sort of pseudo problem, this little contradiction in the way that Thrasymachus describes his view. This is the real response. This actually refutes Thrasymachus' view. And again, like Socrates always does, it starts with a series of questions. And Socrates asks, is the physician taken in that strict sense of which you are now speaking, again, the physician in the abstract, is the physician a healer of the sick or a maker of money? Remember now that I am talking of the true physician. And Thrasymachus answers correctly, a healer of the sick. All right? So, I mean, again, think of it this way. What makes somebody a doctor? Is it that they make money, or is it that they heal the sick? Okay, well, of course, what makes them a doctor is that they heal the sick. The fact that they make money. A person could be a doctor without making any money, right? And a person could make a whole bunch of money without being a doctor. So again, what makes them what they are is that they are a healer of the sick. Socrates continues. He says, and a ship's captain, that is to say, the true ship's captain, is he a captain of sailors or just another sailor? Because he is on a boat after all. And Thrasymachus says, well, no, he's a captain of sailors. He has a special position here. Right? What distinguishes him from other sailors is the authority that he has over them. And so now what Socrates wants to do is he wants to generalize. He says, now look, does every skilled profession have an interest? Right? That is something that it's after, a goal. And Thrasymachus says, well, certainly it does. He says, that for which the skilled professional has to consider and provide. And again, Thrasymachus agrees that that's the aim of skilled professions. So what Socrates does, he's generalized. He's like, so what makes a doctor what they are is that they have this interest in healing the sick. Like that's what they're for. Okay, what makes a house builder different from a doctor is that a house builder has the interest of building houses. That is, that's what a house builder is for. That's what makes one a house builder, is that they build houses. What makes one a physician is that they heal the sick. Okay, and so it seems like every profession is this way. It has something, some goal that it's supposed to take care of to make that kind of a person what they are. And so he continues the analogy. So then medicine does not consider the interest of medicine, but the interest of the body. Thrasymachus agrees. So nor does the art of horsemanship consider the interest of the art of horsemanship, but rather the interest of the horse. So none of the other skilled arts or professions care for themselves, for they have no needs, for they only care for that which is the subject of their art or skill. Right? And again, Thrasymachus agrees. And he says, but then surely, Thrasymachus, the arts are the superiors and rulers of their own subjects? And to this he assented with a good deal of reluctance. I think he sees where the argument is going. So the idea is that medicine, if you practice medicine, you're not practicing medicine for the sake of medicine, you're practicing medicine for the sake of your patients. Right? Another way to put that is, what is the doctor concerned with? Are they concerned with how well they're doing or how other patients are doing? Right? Well, I think it seems very clear that what a doctor is somebody who cares for their patients, not for themselves. Right? A horseman, a great horseman cares for their horses, not necessarily for themselves. Somebody's a great horseman if their horses are doing well, not necessarily if they're doing well. Right? And it seems like you can generalize that to all of these skilled professions. And so I think, again, along with Thrasymachus, you can probably see where the argument is going from here. And so Socrates then just says, he says, then no doctor, insofar as he is a doctor, considers his own good in what he prescribes, but only the good of his patient. For the true doctor is also a ruler, having the human body as a subject, and is not a mere money-maker. The ship's captain likewise, in the strict sense of the term, is a ruler of sailors, and not a mere sailor. And such a ship's captain will provide and prescribe for the interest of the sailor who is under him, and not for his own interest. Then, Thrasymachus, there is no one who, insofar as he is truly a ruler, considers only what is for his own interest, but always what is for the interest of his subjects. He looks to that and that alone in everything which he says and does. And so what Socrates is doing here is saying, look, if ruling is like any other skilled profession, any other skilled art, then the idea is it has something else external to itself that it looks after. Like doctors don't look after doctors, they look after patients, right? Ship's captains don't look after themselves, they look after their ship and crew. Rulers then properly don't look after themselves, they look after their subjects, those that they rule over. And I want to take a minute to highlight something about the reach of Socrates' argument here, and how much this is the first really big idea in political justice that happens here. And this is where it happens all the way, basically at the beginning of Western political thought, all the way back in the Republic. But it takes a long time for this kind of an argument. The idea that a government cannot be in it for itself, it has to be in it for its subjects. It has to be in it for the people it rules. Right. And again, for a long time, in very few places was something like this idea really taken very seriously. Many people, certainly in the ancient world, had much more like Thrasymachus's view. This is, might makes right. That's the way things are. But of course, that's not the way things should be. And so I think you've seen the progression of this argument, like the acceptance of this argument proceed till like now, present day, even the most autocratic tin pot dictator has to at least say in public that they're in it for the people and not themselves. However much reality may belie that. And so what's really interesting is that at the end of this dialogue, where after the refutation of Thrasymachus's theory of justice, Socrates goes on to say something else that I think is of durable interest to anybody who wants a governmental system to work and work well. And so he adds a little bit of extra here. He says, then now, Thrasymachus, there is no longer any doubt that neither arts nor governments provide for their own interests, but rather they rule and provide for the interests of their subjects, who are the weaker and not the stronger. To their good they attend, and not to their own good, even though they are stronger. And this is the reason why no one is willing to govern. Because no one likes to take on other people's problems without being paid to do so. Therefore, in order that rulers may be willing to rule, they have to be paid in one of three modes of payment: money, or honor, or some penalty for refusing. And then Glaucon speaks up here and he says, wait a second, I get money and honor as payments, right? But like, what do you mean a punishment? How is a punishment a payment or something like that, right? And so then he explains. He says, look, imagine a city, right? Imagine a society composed entirely of virtuous people, right? This is what he wants to say. He's like, imagine the best of all people you could possibly have, only the virtuous in this society. Who governs in such a society, right? And so Socrates puts it this way. He says, look, for this reason, money and honor have no attraction for them. The virtuous do not wish to be openly demanding payment for governing, and so to be called money grubbers, nor by secretly helping themselves to the public tax money be called thieves. And so again, money is not going to be very useful to the virtuous person, because the virtuous person is not going to openly demand money and be some money grubber. Okay, that's not virtuous. Nor are they going to secretly help themselves to money, like out of the public rolls, because that's thievery, that's stealing, and the virtuous certainly wouldn't do that. Okay, and so again, money is out as a legitimate means of making a virtuous person govern. Okay, and he says, look, not being ambitious, they also do not care about honor. Right, and again, there's a lot of background here, but what Plato means is that somebody who's actually an honorable, virtuous person does not need other people to tell them how virtuous they are. They don't need anybody to play some special song when they come into a room or give them some special salute or whatever, right? They just don't need any of that. That's not any real inducement to a virtuous person, right? And so he says we're left with that third kind of payment. He says, in this way, they must be induced to serve from the fear of punishment. Now, the worst part of the punishment is that he who refuses to rule is liable to be ruled by one who is worse than himself. And the fear of this, as I imagine, induces the virtuous to take office, not because they really want to, but because it is a punishment to be governed by those who are not as good. Right, now just imagine if any society, I think no society has or very, very seldom has any society, a group of people operated on this kind of a basis, right, where the people who were in charge didn't really want to be in charge, but they sort of reluctantly take the job simply because it would be a punishment to be governed by somebody who wasn't as good at it. I think you can probably find at least some figures who have managed to find their way in charge of something or other in this manner. It's not the most common way it happens. And so Socrates continues. He says, if there is reason to think that if a city were composed entirely of the virtuous, then to avoid office would be as much an object of contention as to obtain office is at present. Then we should have plain proof that the true ruler is not meant by nature to regard his own interests, but that of his subjects. Everyone who knew this would choose rather to receive a benefit from another than to have the trouble of conferring one. So far am I from agreeing with Thrasymachus that justice is the interest of the stronger. And so again, I think this is a lesson that's durable and of importance to anybody who wants a governmental system, especially a democracy, right, like Athens was, to work. I think Socrates gives us, or Plato gives us through his character Socrates here, a very compelling idea about the qualifications for good government. I think he's probably right that if a society were composed entirely of the virtuous, that there would be as much campaigning to avoid office in that situation as there is to achieve office in ours. I think that there's a sense in which, if you ask a whole room full of people, hey, everybody, who wants to be in charge, right? The first people to jump up, raise their hands, say, oh, me, right? Perhaps the right answer is, okay, not you, right? I think there's a good deal of humility here, because in one sense, being in charge seems very glorious, and it seems like everyone's going to think that you're all awesome and everything. But of course, that's the very worst reason to want to be in charge. I think anyone who really knew what they were getting into, who really knew what government was supposed to be all about, would be very hesitant to take office, right? Would be not very much in favor of it, and would not certainly enjoy it, because largely what government is being saddled with everybody else's problems, right? That's what it is. That's what it's for. And I think it takes a very particular kind of personality to realize that, and to be virtuous in terms of governance, right? To make rules to benefit everybody else, and not the person who's in government, right? That's supremely important, not only in Plato's society, but in any society, right? That those who are sort of in charge, that those who have the most power precisely do not use that power for their own ends, but instead for everybody else's.